Chapter 33, Friday, 12:15 a.m. Richard. The man who had married Cynthia, the woman who had made time disappear whenever I talked to her, reached out for his pistol. I motioned with mine, and he leaned back in his chair with his hands raised. "I thought you were dead," I said. "Back at you. Well, I thought you were dead until I saw you on YouTube. You were seriously trending," Richard replied, as though we were taking a coffee break in the office. Wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me, I aimed at his head. "Take off the hat, now!" Without hesitation, he one-fingered the hat off the back of his head, then automatically swept his long hair back behind his ears, before raising his hand again. It was the hair thing that brought Richard into focus. "You look like shit," I blurted out. Richard, sweaty on the basketball court, wind-blown on a sailboat, falling down dead drunk, never looked like shit. His smile hadn't changed, though. Somehow, in person, he didn't come across as an entitled asshole smirking at the world that he appeared to be when he posed for photographs. As opposed to Larry, the consummate salesman, who always greeted you as though he had counted the minutes since last seeing you. "You looked in a mirror lately?" he asked as he shook his hair. "You mind?" he asked. I nodded, and he slowly used both hands to get the hair back into the proper Sir Lancelot look. I noticed he didn't take his gloves off. Then he cocked his head and looked at me. When I made a motion with my .45, he sighed deeply and raised both hands again. He shook his head at me the way he used to when I sloshed coffee on myself. Richard never sloshed coffee, spilled the drink, or let crumbs fall onto his tailored shirts. I felt disoriented and foolish. Nothing made sense. Was he even real? "Why, Richard?" I asked. Richard liked to complete sentences, and he did so. "Paul, I didn't have a choice. You have to believe me. We were out of options." My stomach surged into my throat. I swallowed the bile and choked out, "We?" Seeing my face, he pushed his palms toward me. "Me and Gabriella. Look, we didn't have a choice, and it was your fault she was killed. You know that." "Slide off the chair. Sit on the floor." I managed to get out. Again, he cocked his head before sliding to the floor to sit cross-legged with the ease of a yoga instructor. "Now reach up and slide your gun down the table to me." "Good. Now the chair," I said. I reached out and picked up his Glock with my left hand. Then, as he watched with amusement, I set it back down at my end of the table. I carefully used the toe of my foot to pull the chair to me. Keeping my .45 pointed at him, I eased into the chair with a groan and stretched out my snake-bitten leg. His smile vanished when I spoke. "Tell me how I killed her," I said. "Fuck you. You damn well know what happened." The room spun. "Fuck this." I pointed the .45 at Richard's right knee. For just a second, Richard thought I was bluffing, and for that second, he was right. I felt the pressure of the trigger. Richard saw something in my eyes, and words spewed out. "Okay, it was a fucking accident, and your fault. No, wait, you decided to play the hero, remember? I pointed the gun at you, then swung it over to her just as she planned. It was supposed to look like a mugging. I was already swinging the gun back to you when you pushed Gabriella and jumped in front of her. Don't look at me that way. You fucking know what you did. I just started pulling the trigger. I didn't even know she had been shot until I turned her over. I killed her, Paul. I killed the only woman I ever really loved." "You shot Gabriella," I heard myself say. Seeing something in my eyes, his widened in fear. Keeping his legs crossed, he pushed himself backward until he hit the wall a couple of feet behind him. I'd been searching for answers for too long to let him get off that easy. I waited until he peered through his arms at me. Richard never lied. The secret to his charm was that he believed whatever he said. "Bullshit. The fuck do you mean you had no choice? And if you say my Gabriella was in on it one more time, I'll empty this into your gut," I screamed, lurching to my feet, ignoring the pain shooting up my leg. "Your Gabriella?" he asked, the fear in his eyes drifting away. "Your Gabriella?" he repeated, the fear now anger as he started to unfold himself off the floor. I thrust the gun's muzzle at his face, and he lowered himself back to the floor, his body shaking, his eyes locked on mine. "She was never your Gabriella, Paul. Remember who introduced you to her? Yeah, me. She was never your Gabriella. You were her job, asshole. Go ahead, pull the fucking trigger, finish it," he said, his voice trembling in anger. I often wondered what would have happened if I had finished it before it all came out. Would it have made any difference? Probably not, but I had struggled for so long to find answers that I had no choice but to sit back down and take it. I watched the anger slowly drain from his body, and he hugged himself. Fuck, Paul, can't we go upstairs? What in hell makes it so cold down here? No. Keeping his arms around himself, he nodded and said, Fine. Look, I know they gave you something for that leg. Probably Oxy. How about sharing one? I didn't fill the prescription. Richard shook his head and smiled sadly. Same old Paul. Weed? We're in Colorado, for fuck's sake. You sure? I'd ask you for a beer, but someone came in and replaced it with fucking health shit. I'm sober now. You're sober now? For what, like a morning? 5 days, actually. You're counting your fucking hospital time? Richard's was the most infectious laugh I have ever heard. I think it's because he never laughed unless he thought something was funny. It's the most honest part about him. And like a million times before, I couldn't help myself. When it was over, he was still sitting on the floor, and I was still holding a gun. But the laughter had rinsed away some of the confusion and blind rage. I saw the man for the first time, rather than a memory. His year-round, healthy, tanned face was now weathered leather stretched over bone, his eyes sunken, and the carefully cultivated stubble beard looked more like a panhandler's missed shaves. When I glanced down at his gloved fingers nervously drumming against the floor, he brought his hands up to rest on his knees. For a moment, it was just him and me, two men who had built the company and shared a friendship of sorts. What the hell happened, Richard? I'm sorry I said it like that. At first you were a job. I mean, that's just what she did, Paul. For Dragna? I asked through clenched teeth. Not from anger, but to keep my breakfast where it belonged. Yeah, but for what it's worth, that's all I was to Gabriella at first. Just a job. When I introduced you to her, I think that's all I still was. To her, anyway. Then you married her, our company started taking off, and she began to take a genuine interest in helping me make connections. You have to admit, she and I could work the hell out of a room. I nodded. Yeah, that's true. So you two were still a thing? Well, not exactly. I went from being a job, then a plaything, to someone Gabriella cared about. Our company was making real money by then, and Dragna was expanding. I swallowed and then forced the words out. So why didn't she ask me for a divorce? He cocked his head and stared at me, deciding how to put it. Since it was one of his other honest expressions, I waited. Look, Paul, none of that ever really mattered to you or Cynthia. How often did you tell me you could go back and live in a trailer, no problem? Cynthia, no trailer for her, but a little house in the burbs was all she really wanted. Well, here's a flash. A lot of us aren't like that, okay? Gabriella and I loved our lives, just not the people we had to live them with. Sorry, but there it is. He looked down at the floor, giving me time. Everything he talked about, I remembered. It was all well before my fog bank. I had been so focused on finding out what was hidden in that damn fog that I never considered what was in plain sight under clear skies. Or maybe I just didn't want to see. You don't think we could have worked something out with the company? I asked, knowing the answer. He lifted his head and stopped his fingers from drumming long enough to wag one of them at me. Come on, Paul, we were a boutique shop and you know it. There was no way to split the business. You could have bought me out, I said, and watched his eyes drift away. Or I could be in the wrong place at the wrong time and Gabriella would own my half, I added. He met my eyes and said, Yeah, that was part of it. Hell, maybe most of it. Paul, I said I was one of Gabriella's jobs. Think about it. Why would Dragna sick her on me? Oh, shit, I said. Yeah, old buddy, oh shit. The bigger we got, the more I could do for Dragna. The only way I could keep it all under control was to get you out of the way. Paul, I couldn't even quit. Poor you, I replied dryly. He was still telling the truth, only not all of it. Or maybe, in my confusion, I hadn't heard it all. Perhaps it would make sense later when I had time to replay it. Without thinking, I glanced up at the video camera. The only one carefully hidden, because it was the one the FBI put in to spy on an FBI agent. Richard followed my eyes, and he buried his head in his hands. Oh, of course. Oh, shit. How did I not fucking see that? God damn it. He raised his head and pointed a gloved finger at me, So, what was the plan, Paul? Were you supposed to shoot me in self-defense, or was it all about getting me to confess? Wondering the same thing, I didn't answer. Richard jumped to his feet. My chair crashed into Driscoll's tomb as I rose, my finger pressing on the trigger before realizing he had forgotten I was there.
"Gibaldi, you game-playing chicken shit motherfucker!"
He screamed into the ceiling.